Megan, and I am the current Emerging Professionals Director for Fort Worth HR, and I would like to welcome you to our Inside HR Career Series. This is going to be our third installment, and we will be covering HR, information systems, and data analytics. I want to thank you for spending time with us today. I, along with our committee, we have Megan Halpenny here, working with emerging professionals. We are excited to bring you our speaker for the day. As we are providing the introductions, please don't hesitate. Megan put in the chat a prompt for you to introduce yourself. Let us know who you are, where you are from, and what you would like to gain from the session. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to go over just a few things. If you have any questions during the session, please be sure to share in the chat, and our team will be sure to funnel those questions to the speaker during the session. And we will also have time at the end of the session for you to ask questions. During the session, I ask that you make sure that your microphones are on mute, and then we will allow you to speak at the end if you have any verbal questions that you would like to ask our speaker for the day. Finally, make sure that you stay tuned after our speaker for information about upcoming events, such as our final session coming up for the Inside Career Series and other opportunities provided by Fort Worth HR. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for the day, and I'm especially excited to hear from her. Megan Granberry began her career 12 years ago as an HR assistant, and she now supports a large national retailer as a senior HR business partner, overseeing people operations for 250 locations across 11 states. She's definitely a heavy hitter. With a strong strategic focus in talent development, Megan is passionate about aligning people with organizational goals, leveraging data to drive influence and action. Megan and her husband, Damon, are a blended family with 6 kiddos ranging from 8 to 19 years old. As you can imagine, there is not a dull moment in the Granberry household, with everyone playing a variety of sports, board games, and enjoying outdoor activities like hiking, ultimate frisbee, fishing, and nature walks. I have the pleasure to introducing to you all Megan Granberry, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, everybody. I'm super glad to have you guys here today, and you just happened to catch my biased favorite topic, which is around HR analytics. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but I get weirdly excited about data, and so I'm excited to be able to speak to you all about this today. Some of the things we're going to specifically cover, of course, we'll go through an introduction, so I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a moment. We're also going to cover a few definitions, so some terminologies that are pretty common as you're talking about data-driven decision-making, kind of how you use that data in order to make decisions strategically. We'll talk through some of the challenges that are commonly faced, as well as some skill snapshots, so some things that are important to be mindful of if this is an area of focus that you might have interest in. So about me, Kenya mentioned my husband, Damon. He is actually an active Army military, and so I am an active Army wife. We are about to have our first year anniversary next month. And one thing that I'll say about the military, first and foremost, is, are there any service members on the call or anyone who has family in the military? One thing that I learned very quickly is that you have to be agile and accustomed to rolling with the punches. So we got married in August of last year, received orders in September, and then by October, we had to move across country. And so, oh, great, awesome. Thank you for his service, Pearl. So, you know, in that we were there in Connecticut across the country for about 8 months before we got relocated and are now back here in Texas, which we consider home. I am a native Texan. I was born in East Texas in a small town called Dangerfield, for those of you who probably don't know where that is. One of the biggest things to hit Dangerfield growing up was when it got its second stoplight and its own McDonald's. So you didn't have to drive 30 minutes to get to one. Yes, Dangerfield is exciting. Maybe not the word I would use, but it's beautiful. As I mentioned before, I'm a bit of an Excel nerd, so I get weirdly excited about data and formulas. And so I'm, again, super excited to speak to you today about this particular topic. And it served me really well. So I've been in HR now for 12 years. And I can tell you that this is a part of my every single day life. And so it's very applicable skill set going across all different facets of the HR profession. I am a mom of 6. As Kitty mentioned, we are a modern day Brady bunch. So 3 that I birthed and 3 bonus babies. It is definitely never a dull moment around these parts. And today they are elsewhere. And so you guys get to hear me speak clearly and in quiet. So why HR? I guess for those of you that are joining us, is there anything in particular that stands out to you about today's session? Why join today? What are some of the things that you're interested in getting out of this particular session here? So I can tell you for me, being in the industry for the last 12 years, one of the reasons why I've enjoyed it so much is because working in HR is very much like putting together an ever-changing puzzle because you're working with people. People are all really diverse. Their motivations, their behaviors, personalities, they're all completely different. However, from infancy, human beings have 2 fundamental emotional needs, and it's to feel a sense of belonging and to feel a sense of significance. By nature, humans want to feel connected and capable. Within HR, it provides ample opportunities to be able to make those kinds of connections. But understanding how to leverage data analytics allows us to make meaningful contributions to the organization that we support. It allows us to exercise autonomy or power in positive ways, which is one of the things that I enjoy about it most. So I see some commentary here, breaking into the HR analytics space, how data influences HR decisions. It certainly should. Seeing what others are using to create accurate data, that is a deep one and a very arguable point as to what's considered accurate or necessary. Awesome. So with regard to my career, I accepted my first role as an HR assistant in healthcare industry. There's a couple of you on the call that know my background. And honestly, it was really surprising that I got selected for the position because I knew absolutely nothing about HR. And I was fortunate enough to work for a leader that was very willing to teach. But I really think I got hired out of desperation. She was a department of 1 at the time. 37 weeks pregnant, had no backup, and most of her processes were in her head. And so I spent the entire interview talking about my new baby and all these personal things that I learned about a week later. I'm not supposed to ask in an interview, but I was just dishing them all out voluntarily. So I definitely grew a ton working with that organization. And over time, after about 4 years, I ended up stepping out and left what I consider home. I really feel that that organization helped to support my professional and personal growth. But I left home to develop an HR department of 1 myself as the HR manager in 2015. And then ended up coming back home as a remote HR generalist in 2016. So one thing that I can say, kind of relating back to that sense of belonging and that sense of significance, at the root of everyone, that is something that's very important. And so anytime that you're able to find ways to engage that aspect or measure their sense of that feeling of connection and capability, it makes an impact to all kinds of things like retention. And that was the case in this particular scenario. After coming back, I ended up stepping into a senior HR generalist role with our parent company after the organization was unfortunately sold to a competitor. But that in itself was also a great experience to branch out and do something new. And then in March of 2020, I gained some exposure to global HR as an employee relations manager in telecom. What else happened in March of 2020 for those of you that dare to speak its name? COVID happened. So that experience was actually very interesting for me, and I learned a lot about myself through this process. So when I accepted the role as an employee relations manager, it was both the first time that I had kind of a singular focus in HR, as well as the first time that I was truly 100% remote, where there wasn't a lot of people interaction. And so what I learned about myself is that I'm very much a people person, and I am very energized by those types of interactions and connections. But also I really missed the ability to have my hands kind of in multiple projects and pots. And so working as a generalist and then now working as a business partner, it really lends itself to a variety of different work day to day. But one thing that has been consistent with all of these positions has been this component of HR analytics and really being able to dive into, or there being a need to dive into metrics and identifying what's working, what's not working, and how we can be better based on the information that we're analyzing. So now I'm working as a HR business partner, a senior HR business partner, was promoted earlier this year for Aaron's, which you can see up above me. It's a rent to own retailer. And so I primarily provide strategic support to our divisional vice presidents and regional managers over 2 of our markets, which equates to about 250 stores, roughly 1,600 employees across 11 states. And I have the amazing support of a phenomenal HR generalist who's actually joined the call today as well. So shout out to Regina. Without her, all of that wouldn't be possible either. So how does all of this translate into, the industry in this? We keep saying HR analytics, like what is that? One of the things that I kind of learned from each of these roles in each organization is that there is significant importance behind having what we would call good data and leveraging it to make data-driven recommendations and decisions. So by a show of hands, how many of you have ever made a choice based on just your gut feeling or because something just seemed right to your spidey senses? Yep, there's one, a few, all of us. I can tell you all of us should raise our hand. Absolutely. So if anybody's willing to share, anybody want to speak to a time where maybe that didn't work out the way that you thought it would? Anybody brave enough? What I can say is that over the course of my 12 years in my career, as well as my personal life, there have been plenty of gut feeling decisions that I made that were a little off base. And so while you may have a very well-tuned gut, being able to support your instinct with data is often the difference between having a good idea or having the power of influence with operational and business leaders. Facts or data. Oh, I see a raised hand. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I lost it. Looked like, was it Gina?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, I didn't actually have a comment. I just have your hand raised, sorry.
No worries at all. So in this industry, being able to have the power of influence makes a significant difference because data becomes something that's not as easily argued with, right? So when you're coming forward with a recommendation based on, information that you're seeing or trends that you're identifying, it's easier to get buy-in from operational leaders and those that can help you make change. So some of the things that I might mention over the course of the presentation are a few of these words. So I just want to give you some definitions so we're all on the same page as to what they are. So the presentation is about the power of HRIS or HR analytics. So an HRIS is essentially a software application that allows you to house or store employee information and support various HR functions. So with a variety of different HRIS systems, they have different functionalities. So some may be more basic and really just house information, whereas others could be very comprehensive through the addition of different modules and things to monitor pay or benefits, help with performance management even, or things of that nature, development and growth. Personally, I've had a vast variety of experiences, from shared Google Sheets to house employee information and measurements, to working through an HRIS implementation, to working with systems that allow for turnkey reporting. So push button metrics, dashboards that are tremendously helpful. And then kind of back again, or a mix of all of the above. So in working with data, it's important to kind of understand what you're measuring and what is content worth measuring, I should say. So metrics, which is something I've already said a lot, it's purely just measures of effectiveness. So things that you might measure are value or cost of programs or processes, measuring productivity or effectiveness, or when you pull a lever to make change in an organization, really monitoring the impact of that change, whether it's financially, whether it's in terms of people, like did it help more people stay? Were you able to retain more people, or did it increase turnover, for an example, because that would be a bad effect. KPIs are essentially key performance indicators. That's what it stands for. And they are just a way of measuring how you reach what you're aiming for. So they help to indicate data points along the way to tell you whether you're on track or off track. Return on investment, or ROI, is typically used in the financial realm to really look at actual income, but it's the ratio between income and your investment, or in other words, the return of all that you're putting into something. What are you getting out of it? And so, in my opinion, even the time you guys are spending with us today has a significant ROI, because you're learning more about a specialized focus in HR to help you in your own data-driven decision-making as you progress in your career. For benchmarking, so benchmarking is actually a really big point and is very necessary for a lot of reasons I'm going to talk about real quick. So benchmarking is just a systematic process of comparing an organization's results, processes, programs to industry leaders. So sometimes that is competitor to competitor. Other times it's just general industry leaders. So as an example, what does it mean if I were to tell you that our organization has a 75% turnover rate? What does that mean to anybody? You can pop it in the chat. So if I come to you and I say our organization has 75% turnover rate, the reality is it really doesn't mean anything by itself, right? Yeah, there's a lot of people fleeing like crazy. That's possible. But if I add to that our industry average turnover falls between 85% and 95% in retail, what does that then tell you about our 75%? It actually tells you that we are doing better than our competitors, right? So there is a lot to benchmarking in the sense of you have to know what you are shooting for to know whether you are like headed the right direction or not. So while we may have a goal of increasing retention or holding on to more people, right now we're beating out other competitors in the example that I gave. And likewise, analytics are only as good as the data that's entered. And so if there is no data being captured, meaning we don't have an HRIS or it's not comprehensive, it becomes way more challenging to measure that or gain any metrics that are helpful or meaningful. And likewise, if there's bad data entered, then you have bad metrics. It doesn't really tell you the accurate story of kind of what's going on in your business. So kind of on that note, Albert Einstein said, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. This is a specific area where I just find it fascinating, right? Because there's a lot of opinions around what's actually meaningful to one person versus another. Sometimes it varies based on department or independent goals. Data is important, but the right data is essential. And in this technology-driven world that we're in right now, where there are constant advances, it's actually really easy to be overwhelmed by data. I could say 10 years ago for me and where I was working, it was the opposite. We had to really identify what are the things that we find valuable to measure and then find ways to go track them because at the time we didn't have as comprehensive as a system. Now I work for an organization that has what seems like every metric under the sun, but when there's so much of it, really trying to drill down to see what is essential, what actually is going to pull levers to help us move the business in the direction we want, or vice versa. It's really easy to kind of spiral into that rabbit hole of chasing data points unless you have a really clear understanding of what you're looking for. And so understanding what's important to the business through really clear business goals helps us to evaluate what data counts or what should be counted. So how do we get there? Really, there's, I would say, 3 primary steps when you're kind of evaluating what is important. The first is to understand the question. So you have to start with what the business strategy is. Like, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? And then how does that tie into the people strategy? So when you think about a business goal, and then you think about, people goals, how do they intertwine with each other? And then from there, you can figure out what are those KPIs? What are the things that we're going to measure to indicate whether we are progressing towards that goal or not? So I'm going to give a very, very vague example, but it'll help us get there. So if we have a business goal to grow in retail sales, we want more sales, we want more business. And our people goal is to increase retention. Retention is simply just how many people we are retaining or keeping on staff, right? So if we're trying to increase sales and increase our people retention, how might those intertwine? You can raise your hand if you'd like to speak, or you can pop it in the chat. But I want to hear from you guys. What are some things that you feel directly impact one or the other? If we're trying to grow the business through more sales and we want to retain our people, how do they intertwine with each other? What are some examples? Training, absolutely. I would add on to training longer tenure. So when you have people that you're retaining, so if you're meeting your people goals of retaining and engaging, yes, Christy, the skills become more in depth, and ideally they're improving because you're engaging in that training process. More retention equals seasoned employees, sells better because of their season, 100% agree. Trusted relationships, yeah, absolutely. So once you start asking the questions, all those things start flowing pretty freely, right? How do you measure those things? So if you're wanting to grow the business through more sales, what are some things you can measure to see if you're growing? And likewise, what are some things you can measure to see if your retention strategy is working? What is something we can measure? So on the sales side, really easy measurement is customer counts. Are we increasing our customer base? Profits, are our profits going up? What are some other things we might measure to see if we're growing the business or retaining our people? Employee surveys can certainly do that. Retention rate, yep. What about revenue, market share? Maybe even impact to incentives. So when we talk about cost per acquisition, when we talk about, retaining folks in an ideal world, if we're increasing sales, that also means more bonuses and incentives for our people, giving them more pay, which makes them want to stay, right? So we could measure the impact to incentives. Are people receiving more? Another thing we could look at is average tenure. So outside of just the retention rate, how many people we're keeping, understanding the average tenure of a location or a team can be helpful to understand where should they be in the scale of their training process, or are we actually keeping them for longer opposed to just, adding on a bunch of headcount, right? So I'm going to give you guys a scenario and I'd like your feedback. Let's say that we put these measurements in place and we identify that we have indeed increased our customer sales, but we're seeing a decrease in the average tenure in a location. Based on those two data points, an increase in customer sales and a decrease in average tenure, so how long someone has been with us, what are some initial conclusions that you might draw just from those two data points alone? What are some assumptions you might make? Increase in customer sales, but a decrease in average tenure for our employees. Look at salary. Okay, Christy, you want to expand upon that? Salary meaning that they're leaving because they feel they're not getting paid enough. Bianca, overworked employees. Maybe they're leaving because they feel overworked. Yep, sales pipeline is geared up and doing well. Maybe there's some training gaps. Okay, so what if I went and looked at the numbers? I would have made the same assumption that turnover's likely increasing because of something. We gotta go do something about that. Maybe we need to start training more. Maybe we need to do some exit surveys. But if I go look at data points and I find the average tenure is actually dropping, not because people are leaving, but because the increase in sales allowed us for more labor hours. So we're adding on new team members. The tenure is actually dropping because we're adding new staff. We're growing the business. We're growing that location, which is a good thing. But it definitely shifts our focus and area of attention that we need to put on support for that store, right? Because in an area where we may have thought, oh no, like we might need to reevaluate compensation, or maybe there's a leadership issue. Instead, our mindset shifts to what are we doing to make sure that we're really training these people up and engaging them to make sure that they want to continue on and stay. And then likewise, what are we doing to focus on that long-term staff that's been in place to make sure that they still feel engaged and that they don't feel like they're getting the short end of the stick if all the attention's going to the new employees. Having newer staff such as that can also shift the dynamics of a store. And so the purpose of the exercise is really just to make sure that as you're looking at data, like it is easy to draw conclusions and make assumptions. And while they may be very much on point, there could be intricacies like that that actually point to something different. And so, kind of looking at when you're making recommendations from a business perspective, if they're rooted in those data analytics, again, they have far more power because they're not as easily argued against when they're supported by accurate data, right? That accurate data is an important data point. And so what are some of the challenges with this? First and foremost, bad data. So if the information that you're capturing maybe isn't accurate because of either data entry itself, or it's inconsistent, meaning it's not input regularly, it can impact the measurements that you're finding. So a good example of that, I'll actually use our business now. When we have an employee that voluntarily resigns, as an example, their field manager goes and inputs that data in the system. They're the ones that have firsthand knowledge of what's happening. However, if they are not mindful of what they're selecting, meaning they just put personal reasons is nondescript, right? It doesn't actually give us a sense of why that person is leaving. There may be a more pointed option like lack of training or personal health or something of that nature that helps us really pinpoint why they're exiting the company. So if you have out of 250 locations, 250 different styles of how they're entering that data, it becomes more challenging on my end for a singular person to look at it as a whole and say, hey, what's going on in business, right? So bad data can definitely be a challenge. For those of you who are not super skilled in Excel, pivot tables can be a challenge. I actually find them really exciting, but I had to go teach myself. And so for those of you who are maybe not adept in Excel, I can say that it is a very, very valuable skill set, especially as you're talking about HR analytics, because 9 times out of 10, the information that I'm looking through is not packaged, right? It is raw dates and data and fields that I then compile to show a story or tell what's going on. And so pivot tables are both very, very helpful, but if you don't know how to leverage them, they can be a challenge too if you don't have those kinds of resources. Ease of access. So what I was talking about with getting the data, whether it's raw or packaged, just being able to actually pull the information you're looking for that's being captured in a system can sometimes be a challenge as well. Having the resources available, whether it's IT support when need be, funding for like a more comprehensive system, bandwidth when, especially I feel like there was such a dip in the workforce after COVID that we're building back from. And so bandwidth has been an issue with teams working very lean. And these can be time consuming to pull if they're not easily accessible. And having unclear KPIs. So not knowing what you're shooting for or what those indicators of success look like are definitely a challenge. I all day long can tell you what I think is important, but that may not align with the goals of the business or the goals of the HR department. And so making sure that you're getting clarity around those things help make this easier. And then I think one of the ones that we all deal with or have dealt with in past is this, we've always done it this way mindset. So when dealing with information like this, you're put in a position in HR where you are essentially a trusted advisor, right? So I can bring information to you. I can show you the business case as to why I'm making the recommendation I am. But at the end of the day, I'm likely not the decision maker in terms of facilitating whatever that change is, right? It's a group effort. So if I have somebody that is very resistant to whatever information I'm giving, know that most of the time that is grounded in a lack of understanding. So simply by sitting back and actively listening to understand what concerns or objections someone has, coupled with the data that I have to support the solution that I'm proposing, it's much, much, much easier to break down those barriers and actually make change, and is one of the reasons why I feel I've been successful in my career thus far, is really helping people to understand the connection between the two. What are those things that they're objecting to and why? Knowing what their business goals are and knowing what mine are, it's easier to package together a solution that everybody has buy-in to. So how does all of this translate to the workforce within HR? Analytics are a big part of several HR positions. I would actually say, to a degree, every HR role. But there are a few specific standouts, such as an HR generalist. So HR generalists, they run the daily functions of HR. Often that includes things like the interviewing and hiring, administrating benefits and policies, enforcing practices, that kind of thing. And it is a lot of employee interaction. So having great attention to detail and like super disciplined time management are really key skill sets in a position such as that. An HR business partner, similar, but elevated in the sense that they're responsible for really aligning those business objectives to the employees. and making sure that, everything is trending in the right direction, right? So it's very strategic in mindset, where you really have to be able to sort through the clutter and find the best route. So having really strong analytical and problem solving skills, which is really just the ability to comprehend, interpret, and apply what you're seeing, as well as really excellent interpersonal communication skills, are really key in that particular role. And then you've got the HR analyst, which unlike a generalist and a business partner that is really people interactive, an HR analyst is a more independent role, primarily focusing on digging into the data, right? So collecting, compiling, analyzing, and then presenting out to various levels in the organization on recommendations, sorry about that, for all kinds of things, from recruitment to legal compliance, retention, and everything in between. So kind of as you're assessing kind of your role in the organizations you're in right now, or certain careers or focuses you want to pursue, really understanding yourself and the things that drive and motivate you make a really significant difference in your success in each of these roles. So kind of going back to one of the first slides when I said I ended up focusing on employee relations as an employee relations manager, come to find out while I did that well, I was not passionate about it at all. I love digging in and finding holes and then presenting solutions and seeing those through. In the employee relations manager role, it was very much investigative with no involvement on the back end for solutions, which was just not my cup of tea. And so really knowing about myself too, that I'm a people person, I wouldn't want to primarily work by myself. Like that wouldn't be very motivating or fulfilling for me. And so really having an understanding upon self-reflection of what it is that drives you can kind of help you in your decision-making for these areas as well. So in summary, just to kind of take a couple of key takeaways and put it on paper, and then I'll open it up for questions. Really the difference between a good idea and the power of influence is supporting your instinct with data. And so really diving into the details of why you're making the recommendation you are gives you a power to leverage that you don't otherwise always have, especially with operational or business leaders. Knowing what you're aiming for is so key, especially in analytics. You can pull information, but just as this quote says below, the goal is to turn data into information and information into insight. Information by itself is just a number. It's like when I mentioned the 75% turnover, that is just a number, unless I tell you how it relates to other industry leaders or our organization. And so when you're thinking about analytics, knowing what you're aiming for or how that number relates to your business goals is what makes the difference. Be curious. So ask, I say, the right questions to align business and people, but it's really just asking questions. There is a methodology of like 5 whys. So if someone gives you a response, ask them why. Ask them why again, ask them why. Get to the root of what someone is really striving for, and it will tremendously cut out a lot of the noise, right? To help you pinpoint what it is that you're after. So that as you're asking yourself, what is the business and people strategies of the organization and how do they intertwine? It makes the measurements really clear and easy to find so that you know what you're going to be measuring and seeking after in the future. All right, so that was a lot of information and a lot of talking on my part. What kinds of questions do you guys have? Anything specific that we covered? Anything that we didn't cover that you want to ask about that I might be able to speak to?
Yes, and if you have questions that you want to ask verbally, go ahead and raise your hand, and then I will turn on your permission to unmute your microphone, or you can ask in the chat.
Anything at all? It's quiet now. But if you guys think of something later on, please feel free to reach out. I've got my email here. I'm also happy, to connect with you via LinkedIn. In terms of recommended computer apps or courses, I will say that through SHRM, there's actually a very comprehensive data analytics course that you can take. It can be separate from a certification. So I personally am not currently SHRM certified, but I can go take that course if I want to independently. If you are certified, it counts as continuing education credits. And so that is something. LinkedIn Learning is also full of tons and tons of content that can be tremendously helpful in these areas. And so when it comes to specific courses, I don't have any that I really stand behind per se, but those are a few that come to mind that I would definitely recommend or take myself as well. Thank you, Christy. I'm glad you guys were able to join us. Courtney asks, how would you recommend someone in an HR generalist role move toward HR analytics? In terms of moving forward, I think part of it is gaining exposure. So in your organization and current role, identifying if there are opportunities for you to either sit into some of those meetings and conversations that are being had currently. If they're not being had, even raising your hand to your manager to express an interest in this area and see how you can help support them by putting something together. It helps give you that experience and understanding what works and what doesn't. I would say that most leaders are open to helping support someone's professional growth. And so if you're raising your hand and volunteering and saying, hey, how can I help support you? I want to make your life easier. What can I take off your plate? That is a way I would say to get in. It's ultimately what I did. I just started taking stuff on, and now I have to say no sometimes. But for courses and training, again, really looking through SHRM as a resource. If you are not a SHRM member, I do highly recommend it. It's just chock full of such great content and articles and information and resources. LinkedIn Learning is a great place, and even YouTube. There's all kinds of information out there that you can relate to for talking to a mentor. Do you have any PDC activity ID for? I am not certain I know what that means. We can connect after. Any other additional questions that you guys have? No. Well, it was certainly great getting to spend some time with you guys today. I hope that some of this information was helpful to you. And again, you guys are able to connect with me via email if you want. I'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn. Kenya, if you want to go ahead and take it, I don't have anything else.
Absolutely. And we did not, this series, we did not register for PDC credits, but that is something that we may look into in the future. Would like to thank you, Megan, for such an awesome session and for sharing your time with us this morning and early afternoon. I would also like to thank everyone for attending with us today. If you enjoyed this session and the previous ones, the recordings will be made available on our Career Series webpage. Also, I want to encourage you to please make sure that you join Fort Worth HR for our next legal luncheon and update, and attending that session will provide you with those PDC credits for SHRM and HRCI as long as you register. That is going to be on July 27th of this month. And we will also wrap up our Career Series webinar sessions on August 3rd with our session covering employment law. Again, if you're not a member of Fort Worth HR, please consider joining, because along with events such as this one, you can take advantage of networking opportunities, professional development, certification prep, and professional emphasis groups in your area of interest. Also, we have a HR Insights conference coming up, partnered with TCC Alliance on August 4th for HR functions for non-HR professionals. So Please look on the website at fortworthr.org for all of that information. And if you have questions for any of us, please reach out to us via LinkedIn. Myself, Megan Halpenny, Megan Granberry, our speaker today. And we also have Jim Tam with us, who also was key in helping us put this series together. So thank you all for attending today, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Bye, y'all.